Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we'll get started just to be respectful of everyone's time. But my name is Natalie Schmidt. I am the co-chair of the Policy and Advocacy Committee with the Minnesota Public Health Association. And I also, as my day job, work as the Associate Director of Government Relations and Public Policy with the National Brain Tumor Society. But thank you for joining the last of our public health legislative training series. Um, we will start with some Zoom meeting reminders, go over the ancestral land statement, and then we'll do a quick review of what the last session covered, and then I will get started on this session's content. Mary, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. So like she mentioned, and for those now joining, we will be recording today. So if you prefer to be off camera, no problem. Otherwise, just please keep your microphone muted when you're not talking. And any questions that you have, please put in the chat. So the MPHA Ancestral Land Statement is that we ask you to take a moment to honor and acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe. Indigenous people have a long-standing history and connection to the land since time immemorial and are the original stewards of lands and waters. Many American Indians were forcibly exiled from their lands because of aggressive and persistent settler colonialism and U.S. governmental policies, but they persevered. We make this acknowledgement to honor the Dakota and Anishinaabe people, ancestors, and descendants, as well as the land itself. So I already introduced myself, but for those joining, I'm Natalie Schmidt, co-chair of the Policy and Advocacy Committee with the Minnesota Public Health Association, and I also work in government relations for the National Brain Tumor Society. And I did just want to say a quick thanks to Nancy with the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition and Mark with Minnesota Rural Health Association for collaborating with MPHA on this series. And we've made it to the end. So hopefully by the end of today, you can walk away with some new knowledge on the legislative process. All right, so we will just quickly go over a few things that were covered in the last session that Mark nicely put together. So jumping right in, if you recall, we left off with the general register and the general orders. And so the general register kind of serves as a parking lot where bills await action by the full body of the House. And then we'll jump into the general orders, which is the next step in the Senate. But in the general register, the bills chosen to appear on the calendar of the day or the fiscal calendar are drawn from the general register, and only bills on the general register may be considered for passage by the body. And then in the Senate, a slightly different procedure is used. Bills are listed on the general orders agenda. Senate members, acting as the committee of the whole, have a chance to debate this issue and offer amendments of the bill. Afterwards, they vote to recommend passage of the bill, progress, which is delayed action, or further committee action. And sometimes they recommend that a bill does not pass. From here, the bill is then placed on the calendar. So in the House, the calendar of the day is a list of bills the House Rules and Legislative Administration Committee has designated for the full House to vote on. Members can vote to amend the bill, and after amendments are completed, the bill is given its third reading before the vote of the full body is taken. The House also has a fiscal calendar on which the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee or the House Taxes Committee can call up for consideration any tax or finance bill that has had a second reading. The bills are debated, amended, and passed in one day. In the Senate, bills approved by the Committee of the Whole are placed on the calendar. At this point, the bill has had its third reading, after which time the bill cannot be amended unless the entire body agrees to it. Toward the end of session, the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration designate bills from the general orders calendar to receive priority consideration. These special order bills are debated, amended, and passed in one day. And as a reminder, a bill needs 68 votes to pass the House and 34 votes to pass the Senate. And if the House and Senate each pass the same version of the bill, it goes to the governor for a signature. So now that each body has passed a bill, there's three different paths it can take. So one of those paths is special orders. So special orders are not as common, but it's an option and a more accelerated option for time-sensitive bills. Towards the end of the session, the Rules Committee of the House and Majority Leader of the Senate, they may designate bills from the general order to receive priority consideration in their respective bodies. These special orders bills are debated, amended, and passed in one day. The second option, and the most likely option, is for the bill to go to a conference committee. So if the House and Senate versions of the bill are different, they go to a conference committee. The Speaker appoints 3 to 5 members in each body to work together and work out differences in the two bills to reach a compromise. Once they work out the differences, they go back to their respective bodies to be voted on and then sent to the governor's desk for signature or veto. So once the bill gets to the governor's desk, that's if the language is identical in the House and Senate and received a majority vote in each body, except for bonding bills, they go right to the governor's desk. They don't require any further debate or action by a conference committee, and they can pass or veto the bill, which is what I will jump into next. So this session will cover the governor's place in the legislative process, amendments, readings, deadlines, and what an omnibus bill is. We can go to the next. So starting with the governor. And so once the governor has the bill, he or she may sign it and the bill becomes law. They may veto it within 3 days or allow it to become law by not signing it. So during session, the House and Senate can override a governor's veto as well. This requires a 2/3 vote in the House, which is 90 votes, and the Senate, which is 45 votes. The governor also may line item veto parts of an appropriations bill or a money bill, or pocket veto a bill passed during the last 3 days of the session by not signing it within 14 days after their final adjournment. So the governor also plays a large part in policy priorities. Governors can articulate an agenda for state government and propose legislation to implement it. They can also convey policy priorities through a State of the State address. So many of us have likely heard of a State of the Union, which is the federal president's version, but at the state level with the governor, it's called the State of the State Address, and that's where they discuss their legislative agenda and economic and political achievements. In addition, state departments and agencies may pursue legislative initiatives and gubernatorial approval. Executive branch officials often are called to testify on legislative proposals, and governors and other executive branch leaders will seek to mobilize public opinion and interest groups in favor of or in opposition to specific legislative proposals. They also play an important part in budgeting. So governors develop and submit annual or biannual budgets for review and approval by the legislature. In a number of states and territories, governors also have reduction or otherwise referred to as line item veto power that I recently mentioned, which can be used for the removal of appropriations to which they object. So these tools allow governors and their budget staff to play a strong role in establishing priorities for the use of state resources. And then lastly, special legislative sessions. So besides requiring the legislator to meet in regular session during part of each biennium or 2-year period, the Minnesota Constitution permits the legislator to meet in special session or extraordinary occasions. Some state legislators are allowed to call themselves into special session, but the Minnesota Constitution does not permit this, and only the governor can call the legislature into special session. Special sessions permit legislative action if necessary, and at times when the legislature is not meeting or allowed by the Constitution to meet in regular session. So that usually happens in the summer months, sometimes into the fall. And typically governors call special sessions for 2 reasons. So one being the legislature can not complete work on vital legislation during the regular session or the time allowed during regular session, or there's changed circumstances that require urgent legislative action after the regular session ends. And so some of us might remember that during 2020, Minnesota had 7 special sessions for in relation to COVID-19. So everything from um, improving or changing the peacetime emergency orders, different unemployment changes needed to be made, and other changes on spending bills due to this unprecedented circumstance. Special sessions have been increasingly popular over the years. I guess popular is not the right word, but more common. And it's largely due to these new circumstances that are popping up that historically haven't happened before. Go to the next slide. So amendments. Amendments to bills are changes to the text of a bill that are adopted by a majority vote. So bills going through the legislature are often amended, which can largely change the content and context of bills. Most often, legislators make amendments to bills when they are being considered in committee, and committee members are usually well versed in the subjects of the bills, and they have had the time at this point to consider making these changes. Legislatures can also amend bills when they reach the House or Senate floor, and in both cases are adopted by a majority vote. Generally, the legislator offering the amendment will have the proposal drafted by legislative staff before offering it up for discussion. There's 2 different types of amendment. So a first degree amendment offers an amendment to the text of any bill, and a second degree amendment offers an amendment to that amendment while the first degree amendment is pending. I do believe there's technically a third degree amendment, which is literally an amendment to an amendment of the amendment, but that is a special circumstance, and I think has to be voted on with a majority vote. So I kind of came up with my own example. Hopefully this makes sense, but I kind of wanted to paint a picture of what an amendment might look like. Um, so I'm pretending that the state wants to put a new coal mine on the shore of Lake Superior. And so the text of my bill, this is all made up, but in the text of my bill on line 15 of this regulation, it says, before making regulations under this part, the Secretary of State must consult such persons as the Secretary of State considers appropriate. And this kind of nuanced language is very typical within bills. Oftentimes they'll leave it quite vague and they often get amended, but sometimes that is on purpose. So for my amendment, I said that on clause 15, line 3, leave out the term consult and insert the Minnesota Department of Health, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and any other such person as the Secretary of State considers appropriate. So my reasoning behind that is that this amendment would require the Secretary of State to consult specifically with the Minnesota Department of Health and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency before introducing regulations. So this is, in my head, this was just a way to make sure that this action is held accountable and not only the health of the people, but the health of the planet is being considered with this decision. So that's just an example of what an amendment might look like. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. So readings. A reading is the presentation of a bill before either body when the bill title is read. Bills must have 3 readings, one of each of 3 on separate days before they can receive final approval. Each of these readings are a stage in the enactment of the bill. So, of course, exceptions can occur, but typically that is how it plays out. And the Minnesota Constitution outlines this procedure to ensure that legislators know exactly what bills are before them and to allow time for legislators to study the proposals. So the first reading occurs when a bill author introduces a bill on the House or Senate floor, after which it is sent to a committee for consideration. The second reading occurs when either body finishes the committee action on the bill and is then sent to the floor. This happens in advance of the floor debate on the bill. And the third reading occurs immediately preceding the final vote on the bill. So even though the Minnesota Constitution requires this process, it permits legislatures to dispense with the rule when needed. We can go to the next slide.
And Natalie, excuse me, we have a couple questions in the chat, and I'm wondering,
Yeah,
we're going to have Q&A time at the end, but before we get too far away from a couple topics, would you like me to ask them now or hold them?
yeah, we can ask them now.
Okay. So one question is, if an amendment is made, is made 3 committees into the process, what does that new amendment mean for approvals granted in the previous 2 committees? And if the
So
hopefully I asked that question correctly.
yeah, so let me just go over this too. So if amendment is made 3 committees into the process. So the after an amendment is made and approved by both bodies, that is the new bill, or that is the bill that is being then passed on to the next step. So after each amendment is made and approved, it replaces the previous version, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And then briefly, one other question, and this is going back to the conference committee. What is the typical makeup of the conference committee? Does the majority party get 3 seats and the other party receive 2 seats?
I
I don't know if
am
you know
not sure on that. Yeah, I don't know, Mark or Nancy, if you happen to know.
So as as I understand it, it's 3 to 5 members from each body. And I know in the Senate, 1 member must be from the minority. I don't know about the House. I don't, I'll look up the rules and see if the minority party is guaranteed at least 1 spot on the conference committee. Stand by.
Thank you, Mark. That's a really great question.
Thank you. All right, I'll advance it.
Thanks. All right, so deadlines. So bills can be introduced at any time during a session, but there are committee deadlines after which a bill will no longer be considered that session. Committee deadlines are announced during the first half of session in order to narrow the list of topics to be dealt with that year. So that photo there is the committee deadlines of this past legislature. So the first deadline requires bills to have been approved by all policy committees in either the House or Senate in order to be considered further that session. The second deadline sets a date after which bills will not be considered unless they have passed through all policy committees of both sides. And the third deadline is the date by which the Senate Finance Committee and House Ways and Means Committee must have approved their omnibus appropriations bills. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. These deadlines generally do not apply to tax and appropriations or money bills. When a committee in either house acts favorably on a bill after a deadline established in that concurrent resolution, the bill must be referred in the Senate to the Committee on Rules and Administration and in the House of Representatives to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. Either Rules Committee, when reporting a bill referred to the committee under this rule, may waive application of the rule to actions on that bill by other committees. So it's a general deadline. There's exceptions, is essentially the underlying explanation there. And then lastly, omnibus bills. And this, I feel like for a lot of people is a term that they hear often, but they might not fully understand what it means. So in a nutshell, an omnibus bill is a large bill that includes several different issues under one general topic, such as health, education, etc. It's usually an appropriations bill, so a money bill, and contains many pages, and it's often comprised of several individual bills. So legislators often say the smaller bills are rolled into the larger one. You might hear like package bill. So I remember actually in grade school, there was always a picture of a bus and there was a bunch of bills stuffed into the bus. So it's a bunch of bills in one package is the easiest way to remember it. And the belief of omnibus bills is that if you stuff the single bill with so many different issues, it will garner enough votes to pass, basically making it too big to fail. So even if there are some more controversial bills stuck in there, if the majority of the bills seem easier to stomach, a lot of times they get passed because it's too big to say no to. Um, Omnibus bills are a way to make the system function when its natural order is gridlock, especially in a divided Congress. But then it begs the question if an omnibus bill is actually representative of the community that it's serving. So this is applicable to both state and federal legislation, but it's often a controversial topic, if this is the right thing to do or not. But it is how our government functions a lot of the time. Um, on the federal level, when I think of omnibus bills, something that really comes to mind is that during December of 2020, there was a very controversial omnibus bill. It was over 5,000 pages, and members of Congress only had a few hours to read it. And so it really left it as like, you take it or leave it. And in such a difficult year for our country and all that was going on, it was passed, but it really limited debate and scrutiny over the bill, with it being over 5,000 pages and having such little time to review it. But then on the other hand, omnibus bills, like I mentioned, can contain monumental bills and bills that really do good for the community, and can benefit various different groups that otherwise wouldn't have been passed. And so there's arguments to make on both sides, but it's often used, and you'll likely will hear it a lot. And so hopefully that helps paint a picture of what is in an omnibus bill. So with that, if anyone has any additional questions or comments, I will do my best to answer them. But thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And for those who joined partway through, thank you again for joining this last session of our four-part legislative training series. And this was just a fantastic partnership with the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition and the Minnesota Rural Health Association. So if anyone has questions, feel free to either put them in the chat, or you can come off mute and ask them yourselves. We have some good experts on the call today. Oh, and there is one question. Let's see. Does anyone know what is the latest on the Minnesota House election results? That anyone can answer that question. I think my info was that things were still being counted, but I'm not perhaps up to date.
And the last I heard as well was that it was an even tie. I think I'd have to double check, but I believe it was an even tie.
And that's where I believe it stands as of today, with the two races, Stearns County, Scott County. Scott County recount, by the way it sounds, the incumbents will hold those spots.
It was a very, very close race.
All right, we are getting still some excellent questions. Thank you. So this one reads, what is the typical flow of work during the legislature? I had heard many take off Fridays to return to their home districts and no weekends, at least until the crunch time at the end.
I believe that's pretty typical. I know a lot more about the schedules of the federal legislatures, but I believe that's typical for them to take a long weekend and head back to their home districts.
Yeah, generally noon on Monday. They'll go into session, or committee work will begin, and then Thursday by 4 o'clock, it's kind of a ghost town. The committees are pretty much wrapped up, and then of course the last few weeks of session, it's they continue to work. There's some rules in place as far as how long they can meet for a day. Like I think it's conference committees can't meet past midnight, except if they have a special rule. So there's some stuff, but Monday noon, Thursday afternoon, I would say that if you're interested in going to the Capitol and connecting with legislators, I would say go on a day when there's a floor session. That way, you know they're there. So.
Thank you. Another great question, which I will read out loud, but I have an answer for this one. Given the recent election, what are our plans to maintain our current public health initiatives in Minnesota? And so thank you for that question. I think that tees up perfectly into talking about some of the work that I'll just talk about MPHA, and then I'd love to have Nancy and Mark weigh in. But with MPHA, our Policy and Advocacy Committee puts out a legislative priorities survey to all of our members. So if you're not a current member, please join. And that survey will be coming out in the next week or so, approximately. And that's what helps determine it's not the only thing, but it really helps shape our focus and our capacity of what kinds of work we'll do from an advocacy side for the next 2 years. So definitely watch your email for the legislative priorities survey. And if you are interested, all are welcome to come to the Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting, which is meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m., I believe. It's 1 hour, and you can register for the Zoom on our website at mpha.net. So to answer the question, yes, the advocacy is very important. That's been part of the point of this legislative training series, so that our members and our audience can take whatever issues they are passionate about and have some tools in their toolbox to know how to advocate for them. Nancy, Mark, Natalie, or Diane, please feel free to add.
Yeah, I'll go next. Yeah, this is Nancy with the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition, and I'm also on the governing council for NPHA. And I'm sorry about my background. I did this meeting in my kitchen. So the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition is supporting the creation of a new organization. It's a 501c6. So it's a nonprofit organization that's more of a membership organization in terms of, like, I always use the Minnesota Realtors Association as a good example. So it's a nonprofit, but it can lobby. And we're helping to support the creation of critical access, the Association of Critical Access Dental Providers, Minnesota. And the reason that is useful is that we're really going to promote what we're calling allied organization or allied individual memberships, in just hopes that a wide variety of people and organizations will join us, because when we look at critical access dental providers, they're providing care to the majority of people that are on government programs. There are immigrants, also some of our critical access dental providers, they have staff that speak over 25 languages. They really have a specialty, and they have a lot of special needs and requirements in order to serve their staff or their clients like they do very well. So look for some information on that, and I hope that that's something that you'll think about joining. So thanks.
So Rural Health Association, yesterday, our board of directors approved our 2025 legislative priorities. So if you're a member of the association, those we have a newsletter coming out in the next 24 hours, which will include those legislative priorities. We'll also have them up on our website by the end of the week. And we're always focused on access, preserving access, increasing access. But this year, more than in years past, our approach is more on innovation and using the dollars that are already there and being used in rural health to better serve critical access dental programs. We're making sure that those sort of innovative programs are funded, and that if we need to make some changes in rural health, we're okay making those if they lead to increased health of the rural community. So that's really where our focus is, and that's what we'll be working really hard on. There's some hot topic issues that need to be addressed, and we're going to put some attention to, like transportation. But we're really looking at how can we use what we have more efficiently, and how can we how can we build the workforce in maybe a new or creative way, or build on some creative ideas that have already shown some promise. So that's where we're headed. So watch for our priorities to come out here this week.
So many opportunities to get involved in whatever issues there are that you care about or that are affecting your communities. We have just a minute or two left. So if there are any other questions, this would be a great time to get them answered. I also want to remind everyone that we will send out the recording and the slides after this, and we'll have a link to the previous 3 sessions as well. But if you don't want to wait for that email, if you are inspired, you can go to our YouTube page, or our YouTube channel, and watch those there.
Everyone.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you, everyone.
Great job.
Natalie did great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Mark.